What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and it feels like every day we're talking about a new Tyranid spoiler or leak for their recently announced new codex, and that's because every day we're talking about a new Tyranid or spoiler or leak. This time, we got the datasheet reference card from the instruction guide for Tyranid warriors. Yesterday we were talking about flesh borers on the gargoyle. Quick reference sheet. Today, we got some Tyranid warriors. Now, there's been a lot of consternation about that gargoyle spoiler, assuming that the fleshboard profile for the gargoyles and the termagants ends up being the same. It's potentially transformative change in the base stat line of the faction. But the one we're talking about today is, I think, a little bit less exciting. Let's dive into it and talk about exactly what is changing with these Tyranid warrior profiles. First off, we see a couple baseline increases to the Tyranid warriors themselves. They go up to Strength 5 with 5 Toughness. Other than that, their profile is basically identical. No other changes, just that +1 Strength and Toughness. But the most important thing here is the changes to their weapons. Now, we do see also the Tyranid Prime profile included on the sheet as well, as you're supposed to make Tyranid Primes out of the regular Tyranid Warrior box. So what has changed with one of the most maligned HQ choices in the entirety of Warhammer 40,000? It's going up 1 ballistic skill. That's it for the Tyranid Prime. Sounds good. Thanks, G-Dub. The real exciting part about this leak are the weapon profiles, however. So we finally get to talk about what new weapons the Tyranid Warriors might be bringing. And as exciting as that is, a lot of them are actually mostly remaining the same, which is a little disappointing. We see a couple interesting changes to the ranged weapons. Barb Stranglers going up a point of strength. Venom Cannons also changing from D3 down to flat 2 damage and getting a point of AP, but still staying at that annoying D3 number of attacks, which I really don't love. Their base guns also haven't changed too much, with Death Spitters going up a single point of AP, making a Strength 5 AP2 1 damage weapon. I was really expecting this to go to a 2 damage gun, especially since it's one of the most expensive options, at least in the current codex that Tyranid Warriors can take. I don't know if that'll be the same in the future one, but probably the biggest glow-ups on the sheet are going to be from the lighter weapons. We see Devourers going up to 5 attacks, but otherwise remaining the same. This is going to be a question whether or not that also stays true for the Termagant Devourer. Well, I think it's a question whether or not Gargoyle and Termagant profiles have any difference between them. I think it's likely that Gargoyle stay the same, so we can use that Gargoyle reference sheet that we got as kind of a barometer for how well Termagants are going to be doing. The Tyranid Warriors have a very different morphology, and in the past, Tyranid ranged weapon profiles have been dependent on the statistics of the model carrying them, so it's possible that these stats are not representative of how these weapons would do in the hands of a Termagant. That said, though, having 5 attacks a model in those big units of 30 Termagants with Devourers is pretty insane. That definitely makes up for the fact that the unit may potentially be losing the ability to double shoot, but basically front-loading all of their damage output into a single big attack on the front end without giving them the total of 6 shots per model that they would be getting from the back end. That said, Strength 4 AP0 is not really an impressive profile in the game right now. So unless the metagame changes significantly, I kind of doubt that Devourers are really where it's going to be at for Tyranids. Another weapon that got a big buff are the Spine Fists. These little pistol weapons have basically never seen play because their profile was laughably terrible in the previous version of the Codex, but they're getting the Flesh Borer glow up. They're going to Strength 5 AP1, but remaining at that 12 inches. This makes them a legitimately more impactful attack than Devourers, given that AP value, but with the downside that they are pistols, so you can't advance and fire them, and at only a 12-inch range, it's unlikely you get to shoot them too often. But as a backup cheap option, I definitely can see myself equipping Spine Fists on a unit like Tyranid Warriors if they don't cost too much and you expect these guys to be sinking into melee pretty often. And speaking of melee, their melee weapons did get some pretty big changes. We do see separate profiles here for double Bone Swords versus Bone Sword Lash Whip, although their profiles are the same. +2 Strength, AP2 for 2 damage. The Lash Whip, I imagine it will make enemies fight last if they're engaged with the Tyranid Warrior unit, if I had to make a guess, whereas the double Bone Sword profile will probably give you an additional attack. Now, one thing I want to draw attention to here is the fact that the datasheet reference includes separate profiles for single Bone Sword and double Bone Sword. That's because that's something we didn't see when we got the monster datasheet reference card spoiled. The Hive Tyrant reference sheet, for example, only included an entry for the single Bone Sword plus Lash Whip and didn't have any stats at all for the double Bone Sword. At the time, I conjectured that this might have been just to save space, since the Bone Sword bit was going to be conferring the same base statistic attributes to your attacks, and the special rules of the Lash Whip were not going to be included anyway, so there's no reason to include the double Bone Sword profile here. In this case, they definitely included both, which says to me that there is a potential that the double Bone Sword Hive Tyrant build may actually not be included in the new codex. That would be pretty wild to me, as I don't imagine that the kit is changing at all, so I think the double Bone Swords would still be in there, but I think that's something to keep in mind, just based on the information that we have right now. Those Bone Swords are going up to +2 strength, AP2 for 2 damage. That's going to make these guys strength 7 in melee, and with that 2 damage profile, finally gives Tyranid Warriors a little bit of hitting power in melee. This makes Tyranid Warriors, a unit that was already mostly taken in a melee configuration just to save points, I think more effective in melee, and actually a legitimate threat, especially if those Bone Swords continue to give +1 attack. You can be attacking 4 times with strength 7 AP2 for 2 damage, and if those options remain relatively cheap, I think that unit becomes pretty powerful. If you can also take a very cheap option as your backup, like Spine Fists, for example, suddenly this unit is putting out a bevy of attacks, and getting stuck into a prolonged combat with them could be pretty terrifying, since they're also each able to put out those 2 Strength 5 AP 1-shots with their pistol weapons. One change that we saw in the Genestealer Cult Codex was the Genestealer Cult Pure Strain Genestealer going up to a base AP of 3, and not having to roll those 6s to get to a high AP level. And that looks like that same change is going to be made for the Tyranid Rending Claws as well. On this datasheet, the Rending Claws go up to +1 strength AP4 for 1 damage, which means these guys are going to be coming out at strength 6. And we likely see a unit like Genestealers attacking at strength 5, which is going to be an enormous change. Makes them significantly better against a lot of the very relevant toughness values in the game, especially toughness 8, toughness 4, and toughness 5. Scything Talons also saw a little bit of a change, +1 AP on those guys, which, to be honest, I mostly expected. The AP 0 on Scything Talons also always felt a little bit funky, but we'll have to see if the Scything Talons retain any interesting special rules from their previous version. We can see based on the monster sheet that it's likely that monster Scything Talons get a multi-attack style of ability, where they trade off some of the big damage values of the other monstrous weapons in exchange for most likely making more attacks. And I wonder if a similar thing is going to be happening to these Tyranid Warriors, giving you a pretty decent option to really cleave through hordes if you can make multiple attacks with that Scything Talon at that newfound strength of 5 with an AP value. Seems pretty good at clearing a lot of chaff infantry, and I'm pretty excited for it. Overall, not as much of an impactful change for these Tyranid Warriors, especially not in the heavy weapons department. If there are no other special abilities with their heavy weapons, I think unfortunately this kind of puts the Biocannon Tyranid Warrior profiles into the dumpster, especially compared to some of the other ranged options in the faction. These Venom Cannon and Barb Strangler profiles are just not good. Just actually bad. As much as I love my Venom Cannon Tyranid Warriors, and I like putting all the buffs in them and trying to get the most of use out of those Venom Cannons as I can, D3 shots for strength 8, 2 damage is not really what I'm looking for at this stage in Warhammer 40,000 to actually be clearing heavily armored enemy targets. If those biocannons are pretty cheap, however, then maybe you could see them getting thrown on. Otherwise, I do think Tyranid Warriors probably get cemented as more of a melee output unit with all of these strength 7 2 damage attacks they can be getting out from their Bone Sword profiles, or the high AP attacks they could be getting from those Rending Claws. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that. Little bit of a quick update for you. As always, as we get more spoilers from the updated Tyranid Codex, I'll be talking about them. If you're watching this video the day it comes out as well, don't forget to tune in to Throwdown Thursday, where I'm going to be playing against the brand new Eldari Codex with my Crusher Stampede. It's going to be a live forum bat rep streamed on YouTube at 7 p.m. US Eastern Time. So stay tuned, hit that subscribe, and remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.